and he knew what lay before him. This city, like no other city he had ever traveled in, would define him and would mark what kind of man he was. Well, back to the parade. We know that parades were not uncommon processions in the day of Jesus and the culture for that time. City folk in particular knew about grand processions and ceremonial entrances of crowned kings and warriors. It was all about the way they recognized the leaders of their day. A parade then and a parade now are always reasons for celebrating. You can probably think back to some of the parades that happened in your past. My town being a county seat town, we had more than our share of parades. And I've followed every kind of float you could follow with my pom-poms down the middle of Main Street, Marion, Virginia. Think back on some of those parades and what it meant to be bundled up at Christmas time, or what it meant to be getting ready for the homecoming queen and the court and all of those things that were part of high school time. The kind of crowd that was there that day. We should have suspected the way the story would end. This guy might be a king, all right, but he wasn't an ordinary king. You could have just looked around and seen, look who was in the crowd. There were tax collectors and there were fishermen. Over here in this section, there were blind folk and crippled folk, people who couldn't even talk. Back in the nosebleed section, there was even a different kind of folk. That's where the demoniacs of the day were. That's where the Samaritans were. That's where the ladies of the night were appointed to stay. It wasn't the kind of crowd perhaps we thought. It was a crowd full of disciples, and Luke tells us that it was the disciples who led this parade. They're the ones that went and got the colt in advance. They're the ones that laid their cloaks on the ground, and they are the ones that had the pep rally on the sideline. The disciples were the ones that led the parade in Luke. And you saw how the Pharisees reacted. The disciples' kind of fun and their decibel of fun was uncalled for as far as the Pharisees were concerned. Why, they just knew that any moment Rome was going to come in with their swords and carry them all off to the big house. Everyone, the Pharisees and disciples and innocent bystanders all. Make no mistake here. The cloaks that carpeted the parade route that day were not from Neiman Marcus. Some have suggested that based on the crowd's composition, this is likely what was laid on the parade route that day. Well-worn shawls, hand-me-down jackets, and sweat-stained work shirts of the commoner folk, reminding us all that by design, Jesus was a king of the oppressed and those who suffered. He was a king who came to share our hardships, relieve our sufferings, accept those of us who were shunned, offer us a future with a hope. It was a motley crew that came to march with him that day into the holy city. And on that day of great procession, the day we've come to know as Palm Sunday, we watched everyone around us put all of their proverbial eggs in Jesus' basket. And for all the reasons we've named, this ragtag group of people needed for Jesus to be their king. They needed a people's king. They needed victory over Rome. They needed a victory over their own demons and their own deficits. But it was a fragile hope they had. For their hope came riding in that day, not on a steed, but on a donkey. That should have been their first clue, Sherlock. Their first clue. It was a hope that they had for things that might have been unrealized dreams in a man that they'd cast all of their vision on. But from the beginning, Jesus was never meant to be this kind of king. And so it's true then, as it is true now, that we project all of our images of what we need Jesus to be on him. We project all of the things that we think it takes to make one venerable and worthy. We project everything that we want King Jesus to look like and act like and feel like and be like for us and for all of our needs and all of our expectations. And it continues to be true that Jesus defies every expectation we ever had. But even in the midst of that, he is never far from any one of us. this king who came riding in on a borrowed donkey. The parade has begun. The Messiah is coming. This is the kind of band and troop he's leading. I think God must be very old and very tired. Maybe he used to look splendid and fine in his general's uniform, but no more. He's been on the march for such a long time. And look at his ragtag little army. Look at what he has for soldiers, you and me, dumb little army. Listen, the drum beat isn't even regular. Everyone is out of step, and there, you see it. God keeps stopping along the way to pick up the tiniest soldier who's run off the path to play with a frog or play in the creek. He keeps stopping for those whose feet get tangled up in the underbrush. He'll never get anywhere that way. And yet the march goes on. If God were more sensible, he'd take this little army and shape them up. Why, who ever heard of a soldier stopping to romp in a field? It's ridiculous. Even more absurd is a general who'll stop the march of eternity to go and bring that lost soldier back. That's God for you. There's no endless empty marching. Listen, the drum beat isn't even regular. And everyone is out of step. And there you see, God keeps stopping along the way to pick up one of the tiniest soldiers who wanders off. He'll never get anywhere that way. But the march goes on. Jesus says of us soldiers today that if we forget to speak out for him, the rocks will shout it out. And though it may seem strange to say it now, we know the truth. That before the week is over, he will be lifted up, and all the world will know that this king on a donkey is Messiah. Thanks be